Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee. We have the original crew with us. We have Cannondale and TrainerRoad's Amber Pierce.
Hello, everybody.
Our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hi, everyone.
And our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello. Do you ever hear that in your thoughts? Welcome to the podcast dedicated to make you a faster cyclist. That's the podcast for TrainerRoad.
Yes. Done it a few times.
All the time. I'm always watching, is he going to mess it up this time? Is he going to mess it up? But you never do.
Sometimes I do.
I had to record the one for last week, right? Maxine asked me to do it, our sound engineer. And it flowed really naturally because I've heard it so many times. I think that might be the first time I actually spoke it and I didn't even hesitate.
I think it's because you're a pro too, Chad. That's also why it went well, So excited to have you all here. If you're listening to this, you can check out our other podcast, Science of Getting Faster and Successful Athletes podcast. And also you should subscribe to our blog list, our blog mailing list, I should say. Just our mailing list. Words are hard today. Because what we're doing within that mailing list is not only sharing the articles that our awesome copywriters are writing every week, but we're also putting together curated packages of articles. So we'll be putting together ones on things like recovery or doing ones on nutrition and doing on different things such as that. So it's cool because you can get a list of articles that's specific for especially what a lot of you are doing right now, which is racing, which is going to compose a huge amount of what we'll talk about today. A lot of you are getting back to racing, and we got an overwhelming amount of people mentioning the fact that they either crashed, narrowly escaped crashes, or were terrified by crashes in bike races because you're starting to bike race again. So chaos.
Before this, we worked on lighting for, 20 minutes. I thought my lighting was good. Now look, I open our dock and watch my face. It's I can move it around because it's a white document. So my screen is so bright that it messes up the lighting.
You should join us on.
Just kidding.
Should we take the whole podcast down?
Yeah. Fix this lighting so my shadows are correct.
This is why you join us on YouTube, and you can do so every week. And you can, if you're in the chat right now, let us know and give us a thumbs up. That makes it so other cyclists can find us and find this awesome podcast. Adaptive training, we're adding more people constantly to it. My goodness, I think that we're getting close to 10,000 people into the adaptive training beta right now, which is really exciting. And we're adding more all the time. So stay tuned for that. We also released estimated TSS, which is really cool. Nate, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit of that, or if you'd like me to explain it. I'd be happy to.
What
take
is
it?
It?
If you'd like to.
Just kidding. I know what it is.
Yeah.
So the estimated TSS is for when you're doing a ride outside and you do not have a power meter on that bike. It can be expensive to put power meters on every bike. It's going to be annoying to change it, or maybe your power meter goes bad. And if you wear a heart rate monitor, what we do is we use machine learning. You look back at all your rides and try to figure out, for this kind of heart rate shape, what is probably the amount of TSS that you're going to do. And that way we can put TSS into it and feed that into further features that are not released yet for adaptive training. And it also just gives you kind of a better idea. And so the way you do it to train it's really cool is you go back to rides that have both power and heart rate, and you train the ML with that and say, okay, if it looks like this is what you're going to get. And over time, we've gotten it more accurate, I think, than, I can say definitively, than the heart rate TSS that you would get on that we used to do starting in 2000 or something. So that's an improvement on that. But then the accuracy, it goes really well for an hour or 2 hours and even 3 hours. And then as it goes longer, the accuracy is not the same because things can happen to your heart rate. So a 5, 6, 7 hour ride, you're probably not doing those without a power meter, but that's just something to be aware of, is that the accuracy, how the band gets bigger as it goes farther out. Just like if you're predicting your retirement in finance or something, the band gets bigger as it goes farther out.
Something really cool.
Another good reason to record your heart rate data, to at least record it, whether you utilize it or not, might as well have it. And this is a reason why, because now historically we could go back if you had been recording heart rate this whole time, and we have, more data to inform this calculation.
Mm-hmm. Well, a couple of cool things with this. Number one, I talked to the engineers that worked on this, and it was one of those situations where I had the confused face and there were equations flying in front of my eyes. There's a whole lot more to this than one might think, and I'm very impressed. But the real use case, like Nate said, is when you don't have a power meter on that bike. Right now, what you do is when you have an outside ride and you've done it on TrainerRoad, or it's on your TrainerRoad profile, I should say, like it uploads your outside ride, you estimate your TSS. And we have a little guide that helps you estimate what the TSS is. But this already handles that, and it does that with a greater level of accuracy than just you guessing what that might be by putting that in. So it's really cool. It's just it's kind of sharpening the blade even more to give us a better idea of you as an athlete. It's really cool. It's exciting stuff. So so you can check out all of that. Just go to trainerroad.com and sign up and get faster, as we all are. We should take some time to talk about. Oh, we're going to talk about that.
Some of us are getting slower.
Yeah. We should talk about my national championships experience and wrap that up. So this is buckle in for the next 3 hours. I'm going to give you a very detailed race report. So 90-minute race, no reason it can't be 3 hours on the recap, right?
So I met John. How many years ago did I meet you, John?
I think that we're probably somewhere around 12 years now.
12 years? No, less than that. Because I was already, well, the time that I remember meeting you, TrainerRoad had already started, and we were at this like coffee shop, and people were pitching their ideas. And John was there, and he's like, I have this idea for this thing called Hot Lap, and it's going to be amazing. Dirt bikes, or you can call it dirt bikes, motorbikes, something. We're big. Yep. I was like, cool. After a little bit after that, he started working for us. And since then, John has been talking about national championships for mountain biking and the dream of someday winning a national championship.
Yeah.
So national championships were last year. You had 1 year where you were super fit and you had your wheel, like you used race wheels and you didn't want to use them in practice. And like the strip or something, it was basically the wheel malfunctioned and you got like double flats and had to walk out like 150 miles or something. Yeah.
Yeah. 150 sounds better. I like that. Yeah. That's good.
And then you were really fit, and then COVID happened.
So, in June. Yeah.
Uphill, like the whole way. It was a descent. We just had to walk uphill
everywhere.
So, and then you took some time off for Simon, your son, being born.
Yeah.
Like you didn't go hard that year, and then you were fit, and then COVID happened, and then it was this year. So this year you had what were your goals for nationals?
Like I would say that my stretch, like uber stretch, was to win, right? My stretch was top 3. Achievable was top 5. That's what I thought. And that's in terms of like relative placings to other people. And if that should be some sort of that we're foreshadowing there about problems, but yeah.
So when you do it, we've talked about this a lot, and this is different in a crit than in a mountain bike race or a road race. Mountain bike race, we've talked about many times, is when you start the race, people go extremely hard, and you can either go with them or not, and you have to make that decision about. John, why do people go so hard at the beginning of a mountain bike race?
It's all for positioning, but it's also due to psychology as well. If they're out of sight and out of mind, it's really tough to know how hard you should go, especially when you're racing up at 10,000 feet. Because this race, I think it started at like 9,600 feet or something, and then it goes up from there. So it's super high. So you don't know if you should just be really going as hard as you can, because you never know if you're going to blow up. And if they're out of sight and out of mind, it's really easy to lose track of that, and it's tough. So
there's a psychology part too about it, of I think it's trying to pop people early, because you go hard and you're like, is this going to last 30 seconds or 4 minutes? And you don't know in the fact. And unless you're the one putting the hurt on people, like if you're the one who knows, like I'm going to go for 4 minutes and then it's good and everyone else is hurt, I think that's a huge advantage, because then they start to pop off. And two, if they get to the single track or downhill first or out of sight, like you said, is good. But also we've seen Alex Wild. He's done it twice now. He just did it at the Pro National Champs. I think his first lap, he was 27th or something. And then he ended up, what was his final result?
I think he was 6th. I could be wrong, 6th. Alex, but you're very close to the podium, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what because he just raced his own race. And I think for some people, it depends. So what was your strategy? You had 2 strategies, plan A and plan B. Yeah.
Plan A was to stick with the front group at almost all costs. I figured that there was going to be the flexing that you're talking about, Nate, of trying to get people to do a move that they shouldn't do, which there was. And I thought I'm going to stick with that as much as possible, but I anticipated that some people would be stronger than me. So I thought when I get close to having the sort of blow up that gives you a DNF up at that elevation, I'm going to back off. And we did that. We did almost 380 watts for almost 4 minutes to start that race. And my FTP at get out of here.
Just kidding.
My FTP at 4,000 or 4,500 feet where we're at is 330. So that would be a hard VO2 interval at 4,500 feet. And we did that at 10,000 feet. So like that was the start of the race, and it was extremely hard. And I got to a point where I was like, if I keep going, I'm going to actually be like, I won't even be able to continue, you know? So
this climb, it starts out with a climb, and it's a fire road climb. Is that right?
Yep. It's a fire road, and it's about 9%.
And what's the time it takes to go up that fire road climb?
It takes about 4 minutes, but we did it in under 4 minutes. So it's about 4 minutes up that, and then slight flat section. And then you hit a bunch of surgy single track climbing after that for about another 4 minutes, 5 minutes.
That 4 minute section though makes it where you don't have to do a huge sprint at the beginning, right? Because if it's a fire road climb, like you can get your position on that climb. Did you start to the race? Did you do like a 1,500 watt sprint off the line?
I did. I think it was 890, somewhere around there, just to be able to hold position. And interestingly too, when we started, there's a really strong headwind coming at us up that fire road, and everybody wanted to not be the one pulling, but still the pace was very fast. So people really tried to narrow into the center, and I fought to hold my position there, and there was a crash. I bet I was partially the cause of it. Not like a bad riding move, but just too many people in the same spot. I could have gone down, but I didn't go down. But there was a fall, there was a crash behind us that took out a lot of people. So
yeah, that makes sense.
It was
too, to go
tough in the beginning.
If there is a headwind into a climb, having connection on that climb is huge. That's a good reason to put out extra power. So what happened, John?
Yeah, I went for plan A, did that just before I actually fully DNF blew up. I blew up, and I just fought for the rest of that. Yeah, you felt it. Yeah,
there was an earthquake.
Yeah. That was actually me. So yeah, I made the Richter scale work. And I was struggling to hold 240 watts after that. And I mean, like everything I could do, it was so hard. But I was not the only one. I dropped back to from third back to 10th. But it caused some people to just fully DNF because it was such a hard start and they were trying to hold it.
That's an interesting point, though. When you go too deep at altitude and you're at ridiculously high altitude, clawing your way back is a far more difficult task.
Chad, I've actually heard that a couple times on this podcast. It's called Ask a Cycling Coach podcast, where John has said this very thing. And you know better, because you know that when you go deep, like at Leadville or something, it takes way more time to recover, especially if you have really big anaerobic stores, which you do, John, because it lets you get kind of way farther past your aerobic limit. And then it is so hard to come back because there's not enough oxygen.
Yeah. I mean, there's two parts of it though. I bet that if I had just stayed in at 290 watts, 300 watts on that climb and done that every time, I wouldn't be surprised if I would have finished in a very similar position. And I'd probably be like, gosh, if I just went with them, it's tough. It's there's two different ways that you could do it. Right. I did have a slow lap 2, and then lap 3 and 4, because it was 4 laps, started to come around and they got a little bit better. So I look back at it and I don't know what was the right move. And I know some of you listening to this are saying it was the right move to go with them. And other people are listening to this saying you fool, you should have just stayed within yourself. So it's a tricky thing to weigh. I don't regret the way that I went about it though, with the field that we have. So it was a 22 rider field, but super, super densely packed in terms of speed, really fit riders. And the thing is, if I had let go of those riders, so when I blew up, those riders, so I'm marked, people know who I am. And when I blew up, they dropped the hammer. They knew that it was he's done. Here we go. We're going to attack extra hard. So, if I had gone easy, I don't know what the tactic would have been there either. But yeah, man, really tough. So and then, Nate, go ahead.
I just want to say that plan A and plan B, stick with them or ride your own race. I think that it's very based on what your goals are. Because if your goal is to win or go home, you stick you have to. Or you're very close to sticking. You keep them very close. And you see that in the tour actually on climbs, right? Where someone will do an attack, but someone's smart. And criterium used to do this. They would let them surge and they would just ride their own race, but they wouldn't get out of sight. Maybe pick it up a little bit. But if your goal is top 5, well, maybe then you ride the climb at 345 each time, right? Not 370, not 290, but 345. Something you could repeat each time and still hold the whole time.
And my goal really
you really wanted the jersey. You wanted to win.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to win. So it was kind of like, and then I didn't let that completely ruin my race. You know, I was still able to continue and rally back from that, but man, it was pretty tough. So I was gaining at the end, and I finished 4 seconds off of 5th place. And in mountain biking and in national championships, it's a 5-person podium. So don't hate me for that. That's just what it is. And 4 seconds, it really stung. And I think that I made a pretty big mistake so actually a few things. Let's just go into my preparation and then I'll talk about the mistake, if that's okay. Nate, you and I talked about the elevation thing beforehand and what we wanted to do. Last year I was up there, or last time we raced it, I raced on my 4th day there. Probably the worst day you could possibly race when you get up to elevation. Like your body is just really in the hole from being up at 10,000 feet. So this time I went up and I raced within 20 hours of when I got there. So I got there in the afternoon and then raced the next afternoon. So that was, I feel like, a good approach to do it. But if I did it again and life would allow me, I would be really curious to do like a 2-week lead in where I'm spending time at elevation for 2 weeks. Is that what you did, Amber? If you ever did like high elevation races? I don't know if you really had those. You probably just hit those in grand tours, but.
Yeah. Well, if we knew there was a stage race coming up at altitude, we would definitely try to acclimate.
Yeah. And would you be like 2 weeks, or would you be
at least?
Yeah. So I'd like to try that, but I do think it was much better than 4 days. That's for sure. I didn't feel as short as last time. So, but this,
because especially at that altitude, it's so extreme that when you go for 2 weeks, one of the things that you give up is you can't do high intensity work. So you have to balance that against the acclimation and figure out, what's going to be best for you. So it's not like if you're racing at altitude, just do this. I don't think it's that cut and dry. So, I think your strategy of going up right before was not a bad one either. I mean, it's certainly something to try. And like you said, now you have a data point and try something else.
You needed my altitude tent.
Oh yeah, that would have been awesome.
Keegan has it for Leadville.
Well, look at that. There we go.
Yeah. What about hydration? How'd that work?
This is the first time I've ever cramped in an XC race ever, like a race this short. I cramped inner thighs. Those are always the first ones. Like your adductors are the ones to cramp. But part of that too is I tapered pretty substantially coming into this, and I feel like I got a lot out of myself. And that's kind of the case with that you want. But I think coupled with probably elevation, stress, of just being a national championship, you know what I mean? And then dehydration and all of those things, I think that all those factors probably contributed to that. I didn't let them slow me down. I just kept pushing through the cramps and just bit a hole in my cheek and kept going, which really hurt the next day. My legs they didn't work for a bit. But the thing that I've learned being up there is that it is just impossible. It's so hard to stay hydrated, like so hard to stay hydrated up there. I was just covered. I'm not a salty sweater particularly. And after that race, my jersey was just covered in salt, like covered in salt. And that was only a 90-minute race, right? So I was taking in precision hydration, 1,500 milligram tablets the night before, or night and morning, basically. That's a routine that I do when I'm getting ready for a race. I'll do that for a day or two leading up to it. And body usually works really well with that. And I don't have problems with dehydration. And if you looked at the P test, Chad, you've mentioned this before on the podcast, P color didn't throw any red flags, but that's not necessarily fail proof, right, Chad? Is that correct?
That's it doesn't tell you a whole lot. I mean, there are a lot of ways that you can manufacture clear urine, and they don't necessarily indicate that you're well hydrated.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was taking in everything there, but it's just really tough. And it's because it's so dry and everything evaporates so quickly. And it's, yeah. So I think I probably was dehydrated, and I'm not sure. I would love to talk to Andy Blow, like on a one-on-one sort of a thing, to see like how big is the difference when you're up at 10,000 feet, and how do you kind of combat that? So it's really tough. But
hey, how long was the race? 90 minutes?
90 minutes. Yep.
90 minutes. So you ate nothing, right?
No, incorrect.
Carbs
took in lots of carbs. Yeah. Shoot. So lots of carbohydrate leading up into it. And then I missed my feed on lap 2. So my plan was to take like 1/3 filled bottles every lap. And over the course of 4 laps, that would give me, enough water so that at that point I'm taking in what I should take in, which is roughly a bottle an hour. But on that second lap, when I came around to grab the bottle, a rider DNF right in front of me, like pulled into the feed zone and stopped. And I was either going to hit him or miss my bottle. It was one of the two. So I chose to swerve and to miss him, and miss my bottle. And then my wife, who is amazing, and she was giving me bottles in the feed zone, she thought that it was her fault that she missed. And then she ran back to the car to go get a gel and probably set like a mile PR up at 10,000 feet. But she ran back there to get a gel because she knew that I was missing carbohydrate, and she knew that I would need more carbohydrate. So she got a gel and a bottle, which was amazing on the next lap. So that helped, but I still took in about 110 grams an hour over the course of that race. That's the rate at which I was taking it in.
Did you have enough water then too to digest that 110? Because that can also cause you to be dehydrated. Yeah, for those who don't know, you put too much food in your stomach without enough water, it sucks water out of your the rest of your body in your stomach, and it can be tough.
Yeah. And that's why I was taking it in through mix, not just, I only took that one gel, but everything else is through mix. That was my goal there. And one thing I did with nutrition too, I've tested this a lot, and I kind of like carb loaded in a different way leading up to this. With a lot of my training, I was getting to the point where I was trying to push the envelope and take in 115 grams an hour and see how my body would take that. At first it was tough, and then my body got used to it over about the course of a month. And I honestly think it's a huge factor in late race efforts. I know that you're probably thinking like everything is tapped and filled up and you probably don't need more, but in talking with other riders that are trying that approach and trying to fuel, not just with anything, but very specific, distilled forms of carbohydrate, when you do that, it's crazy. You can just keep punching at the end. Whereas otherwise you can't. So I thought it was good there. Then one more thing. I haven't mentioned this before nationals, but now I think I can mention it. But one thing that I have found, I have a hard time with caffeine gels. They tend to cause like a gut distress, and taking in like no dose or anything else like that. Also same thing, like pilled caffeine, same thing. And I feel like it always hits me too late. And it's tough for me to time it so that I really get that caffeine boost for the race. So I've tried using Run Gum, and it's basically just a caffeinated gum that tastes absolutely terrible. But what I've found with it comes in 50 milligram tablets or 100 milligram tablets. And I have found that to work extremely well for me. You get the caffeine pickup really fast. It doesn't leave you really fast. You don't have those crazy highs and lows. So it's just really easy to time it. Oh, Chad's got some.
Yeah. So Rev Gum.
Oh.
Yeah.
There we
There's
go.
also a military one that's super cheap. This is REV gum.
Same concept.
And then there's a military branded one that's comes in colorful packets. Same thing. They all taste pretty terrible, but it's a really quick caffeine hit.
Yep. And it's not like quick spike, quick drop, which is what I experience when I take it in through my gut. I experience like a random pickup. I don't know when it'll happen. And then like a precipitous drop off.
Does it absorb through your mouth at all?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. So
that's why it's so rapid.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's kind of exciting.
I find it hugely advantageous, and I'm not the only one. I know of other riders. In fact, Cole Patton on our previous episode that we did with this podcast where I interviewed the pro athletes, he mentioned it. And after it, I was like, dude, we're going to have to cut that out. That's like our secret. We can't talk about that. But
not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. It's out there. So
I'm just going to have like 8 pieces of gum in my mouth.
Like
no,
big
don't do that. You can
like a cow.
Yeah. Just that is a joke, everyone. You can actually kill yourself by having too much caffeine. So
absolutely.
Like be careful with the dosage. If you ever do powder, I would never do a powder caffeine. That's what I've first heard about. That is there's powder, and someone got milligrams mistaken for grams, and then so they put in.
Oh my gosh!
It was like the wrong amount, and that can kill people. So don't overdo the caffeine.
Also for me, or if anybody else doesn't take in caffeine regularly, like doesn't drink coffee or anything else like me, 200 milligrams feels like it just completely wrecks. It's too much. Like it really gets you kind of too revved up. So they have extra strength and standard ones, and we are not sponsored by them at all, by the way. And so they're just getting, I guess, free exposure here, but they have 50 milligram and 100 milligram tablets. And I take a 50 milligram about 45 minutes before the race. And then before, when I'm on the line, I'll be chewing it, and then I'll spit it out usually right when we're starting the race, or somewhere around there. So I found it to be hugely helpful. So that's the only other nutrition thing, but I feel like that part was dialed.
You're on like a big 7-hour ride, you know what I mean? And you're like in hour 5 and you're bored, and you just like, I'm gonna chew some gum as I'm going.
Chew some gum.
Yeah. I feel good, right? That kind of feels awesome. You put in is gum biodegradable? Is that okay to spit out, or you just put in your jersey pocket?
That's a great question.
I say put in your jersey pocket. Who here has gotten gum stuck in something because somebody spit it out?
So annoying.
Right
here.
It's the worst. Yeah. You can have you always have like wrappers and stuff. You can put in a wrapper pretty easily and just be a good human. Okay. Let's move along. Equipment. You had the Epic.
So it's so good. And it's, I think that I might be wrong on this, but I think that out of the top, for us, the first 6 riders, I think that 4 or 5 of the 6 were on Epics, the new one. It's just so good. Like it is advantageous, I believe, personally. I'm not sponsored. I paid for the bike, all that stuff. I just think that it is advantageous. It's killer bike. For this course, I also ran a high post instead of a dropper post. That was a big decision point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't ride with a high post ever.
Wait, what is the difference between a high post and a dropper?
High post is a standard seat post, does not go up and down. Dropper
just
post.
A seat post.
Yep, just a seat post.
Yeah.
Dropper post, you can lower it and raise it, of course. Mm-hmm. So, and I have not ridden with a dropper. Sorry, there's a car alarm going on outside right now, if y'all can hear that. But I don't usually ride with I haven't ridden with a high post in years. So I was kind of worried to just make that decision. But the night before,
do it on national champs, right? Like why try it? Just go.
And
I can save a pound, so just do it. So this is the decision. And John is one of the only people in this course, I think Keegan too, that I personally know that this is the right choice. Normally, people are going to be faster with the dropper, even though you lose a pound on the uphill, because of the body position. You won't be able to you won't hit your brakes as much. You'll be able to carve corners faster, be safer on the downhills. But because John and Keegan, I think Keegan high posted it too, right?
Yep.
Both of you have ridden this course before. You're both very skilled technically. Keegan even more so than you, and you knew that you didn't need it.
We rode it the night before with the high post to double check. And we did the descent full on, and we PR'd, both of us. We set the fastest times that we have set on that descent, faster than the last time at nationals with dropper posts. So at that point, and it didn't feel scary, didn't feel sketchy. We had it, it didn't slow you down. And there's something to analyze. If you are making this decision, first of all, you should have a lot of bike skill where you know that running that is not going to cause slowing down and not going to cause danger. But if that's the case, you have to look at the turns in the course. Do the turns have a speed limit that's governed by something else? And what I mean by that is these turns are really governed by cross-country tires. Like you can only push them so hard because the upper section is really tight, turny, and loose and rocky. And my tires can only grip so much. So having my saddle dropped doesn't really help me gain any more speed. It might help me recover a little bit better. But in this case, we didn't feel like that really made a difference in terms of recovery either. We were still fresh because it isn't an overly technical course. And I know that you're probably thinking a pound is ridiculous. Eat one less something,
5 seconds.
But there's a difference that you feel. So sure, there might be a difference on the climb, but there's a difference in how the bike feels when you don't have all that weight up high. I know that sounds silly, but when you just have that really light seat post up there instead of a dropper post, especially the Axis one that I use, which is like, it's over a pound heavier. It's really heavy, and it has a battery and electronic motors, and it has all this stuff up high. It really makes that post heavy. And when you get out of the saddle and you sprint without it, you feel like your bike is like, it has like turbo mode or something. It's so crazy how light the bike feels. So even subconsciously, it just felt racy. And I know that 1 pound less also helped me going uphill, but I think it was the right choice. I also, because I did that though, I had to make a couple changes to my bike. I lowered my fork pressure by 2 PSI because since I don't have the dropper, I kind of have to hang further back on the bike because I'm kind of stuck behind that saddle when I descend. So I wanted my fork to be softer so I could get more pressure and weight onto the front tire, even though my body wasn't as far back for that.
Nerd alert.
Yep. And then 2.4 tires is what I ran. I know a lot of people are debating there, but that was absolutely the right choice for me instead of 2.25s, because the traction is just through the roof. And then this course has a lot of bumpy little roots and the bike was able to roll right over. But one thing that I think I probably could have done better is maybe an aero helmet instead of a standard one. We had that headwind. So it was kind of making that climb faster through the air than what you were actually riding at. And I think that we averaged somewhere around 12 or 13 miles an hour. So that's right around where, that makes
with
a
a headwind. It could be effective 20, 25, 30 miles per hour.
Yeah. And what sort of temperatures were you dealing with? I don't imagine humidity was an issue, but what was the temp?
It was 80 degrees. But when you're up at 10,000 feet, 80 degrees feels like 100 degrees. It feels so hot when the sun hits you. So, yeah. So I don't know, maybe it would have been worse there, but I didn't recall feeling cooked. And that was probably because I've been, training and riding in over 100 degrees here in Reno prior to that, but maybe an aero helmet would have been better. So, yeah.
Okay. Any final thoughts on this, John?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that the focus on aerobic fitness and sustained VO2 and high threshold efforts was good. For this course in particular, it's really all about that climb. And I follow the polarized plans leading into this for the past, I think it's been 13 weeks or so of following those leading into nationals. And what I did is, in a lot of cases, adaptive training was giving me the sort of workouts. It was perfect. It was giving me the sort of workouts that were that sustained sort of work that I needed to be able to work on this. So it's like they're really uncomfortable. Amber mentions them all the time. They're the bane of her existence. Those long VO2 intervals where you're, 4 minutes and above. It's just really hard and that's like when you're starting to tip out of VO2 as well. And it's kind of like really high threshold. It really all feels the same. It's really miserable, but really 4 to 10 minute intervals was where a lot of my focus was. And I think that was best. I also look back, and even though I was disappointed with where I placed relative to other people, I'm super satisfied with my training. I've never been more consistent. I didn't once skip a single workout because I didn't want to work out that day. I didn't once do it. Every time that I wanted to, I stopped and I thought, do you want to win national championships? Then what do you need to do? Right. I thought of it from that perspective. And then I also, looking back at it, yes, there were times when I missed workouts because life just dealt me cards where I couldn't do it, but super consistent. My taper was good and my effort in the race was absolutely capacitive. And I got a ton out of myself. I feel like I got more than I thought. So I'm super satisfied with the effort and with everything else. I just think that I attached too much to the result because my heart was absolutely broken to come that close. And I look back at all those times and I was like, I did not want to train, did not want to stick through with that interval, did not want to do that. And every time I was like, it's worth it. You'll be on the podium. It's worth it. You'll be on the top step, It's
out of your control. So I Instagrammed John after this. I'm like, you should have picked better parents like that, which is ridiculous. But that is like at this top level, that is a huge difference. You could prepare just as well, have just as much grit, have just as much time, do more. But because of who your parents were, you don't win, which is a sad fact in our sport. It's really sad fact, but it also, if you just go against yourself and like, do I execute well? And you have that outcome of, did I build well? Did I execute well? And then that's the place where you get the enjoyment and the fun. Then it's you kind of always, not always win because you can still mess up, but it's a lot easier than saying, I hope that this person with Olympian parents don't show up and beat me.
Yeah. And I feel like I've got, Amber,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious, Jonathan, if you imagine that you hadn't attached yourself so much to that outcome goal, how do you think you would feel different right now?
So I think that I've already reckoned with it. And I think I've kind of like come to a better place with all of it, because I think that I would feel the same that I currently do, which is really satisfied. I've never had such a great build and execution. Never have. I'm super satisfied with that. But if you ask me when I crossed that line, it was all for naught, right? It was like, I was even like, what a fool to like convince yourself that you were going to get on the podium all those times. And that's what you used to drag you through all that training and misery and discomfort and all of that. And then you didn't even get there. That was what the bad side of things told me right when I crossed the line. But in going through and processing it, I'm like, holy cow, I executed better than I ever have. I'm really impressed with that part of it. So I'm really happy with that. Yeah.
Cool.
The last thing I want to mention is, so at short track the next day, I had my first experience with arrhythmia. So I don't know of what kind, and I still, so pending appointments with cardiologists and such.
what does that mean, John? For not for me, but for everyone else.
And cardiologists, please forgive me. I'm probably going to say 10,000 things wrong here. So, but I basically, so while riding, experienced irregular heart rate. That's like as basic as I could lay it out. And what that felt like was my heart rate was, I don't know, because I was using my watch, and that's a terrible heart rate monitor, especially when you're bouncing around on a mountain bike, but I could feel it. And it felt like it was triple speed out of the blue. And then it would stop and do really slow and big forceful beats every once in a while and very irregular. And then suddenly would go fast again. It did that for the first lap and a half of short track. And I actually just got off my bike and stood there for a while, and it stopped. And then, not stopped. It got normal again. My heart kept going. And then I just kind of like, my son was right there. He gave him a kiss. He fixed my heart, I like to think. And then after that, I rolled down and then just kind of rolled tempo to see if I was going to be okay. And my heart was normal thereafter. And tempo allowed me to drag back to 8th from 22nd in short track. But yeah, so it was a little scary. And I just want to, I know a lot of people are concerned about that because they saw that on my Instagram. So I am working with my GP and a cardiologist here to get in to see them. It's really long lead times to do that sort of stuff.
Did you take caffeine on that day?
I did, but no more than any normal day that I had done leading up to this with loading with, or getting used to that.
Because a lot of things can trigger arrhythmias. So it's, I'd like to be optimistic and tell you it's nothing to worry about. It was situational, but yeah you're doing the right, following the right course of action, working with a GP and a specialist.
You can do this stuff. Well, my opinion, people should do this before you start racing. And there are some races I've done where they require you to do like these tests. I went to Mayo Clinic and I had a cardiology test there. And I actually have something with my heart where I'm going to get this wrong, but I think when it beats, it goes back to its shape faster than normal. And the doctor said to write this down because if I ever go to the emergency room and they see it, they're going to think I'm having a heart attack because just naturally the way my heart goes. But I forgot what it's called. I don't know how to describe it to them. So I don't know. I should write it down and put it somewhere. Yeah. I think you're going to think I'm having a heart attack. But there are things where they can detect where, you've heard about people, it's so sad, die like in an Ironman or something because of a heart issue. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's probably good to go see a doctor ahead of time to see if they can rule out some things that could be bad. I mean, in general, it's good to look. Your heart's pretty important. That's a pro tip.
Thanks, Nate. Hard hitting facts over here. Yeah. The thing with it too is that I know that a lot of athletes experience this too. It's very shocking and unsettling when you experience it, for sure. But I think that it's something that also we always want to find the one cause for it, but it's likely probably a factor of many things, considering the huge amount of fatigue that I had from the race the afternoon before that. And I was racing early in the morning the next day. The fact that I was up at elevation, the stress, the dehydration, the everything else, even though I felt hydrated and thought I was doing it, I don't think I was fully hydrated. So probably a lot of factors contributed to that. So yeah.
Probably not a issue. Yeah, exactly. You said it. Okay. Final thoughts, or no, in closing, John, first question. Are you going to try to do race nationals again?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm excited for it.
2, Chad, how much did you miss? What was your time that you missed podium by at nationals?
Less than a second.
Less than a second. John, you did 5 seconds. So we have 2 people here who missed podium at a very close margin. Amber, did you ever miss podium at a national event really close?
Yeah, 5th in the time trial one year. Or no, so technically podium, but not podium.
Yeah.
So Amber is podiumed and not you two for 5th. So
close.
Maybe I'll miss it by 5 seconds, but it'll be like a sprint pack finish in a crit. So 5 seconds will be off the back by a lot.
Speaking of that, Nate, you're racing this weekend, Tahoe Trail 100. It's a Leadville qualifier, but you're not trying to qualify for Leadville, right?
No, I'm not.
So you're not racing the full 100K. You're racing the 50K version of this. What are your goals with this? Because Cape Epic's close. It's not far away.
Yeah, Cape Epic's 100 days away. Sophia's, if she wants a free trip to South Africa, she is gonna race with me. She can race with you if she wants to pay for everything. But I'm doing the 50, which is just 1 lap. So I did it before in when I did the 100 in 2018 to qualify, I did the first lap in 2:35.
Yeah.
I think my FTP is similar to that time, but I think I was more long fit, but also I was pacing for 2 laps on that one. But my skills are higher, but I'm also about 7 pounds heavier, all muscle. And so I don't know what I'm going to do for time. The goal is just to have a really like well-paced, see, this is what I'm talking about. Well-executed 1 lap pace where I don't blow myself up at that first climb at North Star. I be smooth on the descents. I don't scare myself, but I also don't act like a big weenie. I'm going to wear my biggest POC helmet that I have.
Nice.
But other than full face, I kind of want to wear a full face helmet, but I'm definitely still scared from my crash in October. Though I've mountain biked since then, but I haven't mountain biked outside since January, and we'll see what happens. I'm going to do just 2 bottles on my bike. So I'm going to go a little bit lighter weight, not a hydration pack. I can always use the aid stations if I want, and probably eat 140 grams of carbs per hour, maybe for like 2 hours. I'll probably bring 140, what is that? Almost 300 grams of carbs with me. And just try to not get stuck behind people on the worst part. I think there's one section that I can actually shred in there. It's like the little green downhill. I just don't want to be behind anyone on that. So I'm going to race people into that section like I'm Jonathan Lee. And let them yell at me.
Nate, what does your 300 grams on the body translate to?
I'll probably put it mostly in mix or all in mix. And I know some people will be like, the osmolarity is going to be bad, but I do it all the time and it's no big deal for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your goal with this, Nate? Is it to build confidence? Is it to get a measure of where you're at? Or
it's an easy way to do a 2-hour mountain bike ride that's really intense. Like the motivation's really low and I get it done during the day and it's fun. Get to see some people. I actually have to leave right afterwards, so I can't stay. The bad part, so looking at past times, the 50 is not as competitive as the 100. The 50 is just 1 lap, the 100 is 2. The 50 on previous times, I would have like podiumed in my age group, which is kind of cool. But in the 100, I would have been like, 12th or 15th or something like that. But Brandon, our COO, who's fast, he's doing it too. And now he's in my age group. I'm 39 and he's like 30. So there's
he's doing the 50K, not the 100K?
He's doing the 50K. Yeah.
Oh man.
So he should be able to win the 50K, I bet. He is the slowest he's been in many, many years.
He's still
because
fast.
Again, it's not really competitive, and his downhill skills are equal or better to mine now. So he should be jamming.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'll be up there riding lift laps all day, but I will, when I see you sitting on a chairlift going over you, I will wave and cheer you on. Yeah. There we go. Horns. Yeah. Sorry. Throw the horns. Tom's question. He says, longtime listener, TrainerRoad user, but first time caller. Thank you for an outstanding product. I'm hoping to get some insight into why top professional cyclists are not 100% transparent with sharing their power data post-race or post-stage. For me, power data allows us mortals to better appreciate what these incredible athletes can do in order to be at the pointy end of the sport. Recently, I've heard 2 explanations as to why an athlete may choose not to share their data. The first one had more to do with professional riders being under a microscope all the time, and that by not sharing data, they were holding on to something they could keep private. I found this a weak argument, but who am I to judge if this is truly the case? The second indicated that if shared, other riders could then use this information to gain a competitive advantage via strategic training. I find it difficult to believe and simply knowing a competitor's max sustainable watt kg over a given distance, time, or climb can be of great strategic value. Like all of us, I would assume a professional cyclist is attempting to maximize their FTP as well as their ability to ride for longer at higher percentage of their FTP. Maybe I'm oversimplifying this and missing something, but in my mind, Wout van Aert and Julian Alaphilippe didn't have this aha moment when Matthew van der Poel published his Strade Bianche power file. So he says, thanks and 5 stars all around for your product, forum, and of course the podcast. Amber, you're our pro, so you'd be the best one to answer this. Why do so many pros hesitate to share power data?
Well, there's a lot of reasons here, and it is a highly personal decision. So I can't speak for everybody, but I can offer some things that I've heard, some things I've observed, and I don't think that you're far off in the 2 reasons that you've mentioned. But one of them I think is kind of the mental game, right? So one thing that most of us have probably experienced at all levels of this sport is that everyone's an expert. You go on a group ride, someone's going to have a very strong opinion about what you should be doing or shouldn't be doing. And it's pretty rare that this type of advice is beneficial. So one of the things if you really want to pursue cycling, that's really important to do is to kind of establish a group of trusted people, a small group of trusted people. And those are the opinions that you listen to, and you try to tune out the rest of the noise. This is a lot easier said than done. And so when you share, the more information that you put out there, the more ammunition you give the armchair experts to judge what you're doing. And some folks have a really easy time with this, and it doesn't bother them as much as other folks. But I will tell you that the easiest, lowest energy cost way of dealing with this is to not deal with it at all. So just not putting it out there, you remove the necessity of having to maybe deal with whether it's negative or positive feedback, because it doesn't matter what the information is. People can look at it and say, wow, your power is so high, that's really impressive. Why aren't you getting better results? Or, wow, your power's, or geez, your power isn't that high compared to so-and-so. And it can really build in some nasty kind of mental blockers that, as we know, the sport is very, very mental and emotional. And so just not introducing those kinds of complications to your mental game can be really, really helpful and healthful. Another reason is, and you alluded to this, is a lot of people view this information as sort of like intellectual property, right? Or proprietary information. I personally don't really buy into this as much. So when I first started racing, I was racing with the Webcore Builders pro women's cycling team, and Christine Thorburn was on that team. She was our GC leader, Olympian, amazing time trialist, and she had no problem sharing her power data. And I remember somebody asking her about that one time, and she just said, well, you can either do it or you can't. It's that simple. So what are you going to do with the information if, so she didn't see it as a strategic advantage or disadvantage for somebody to have that information or not. It could be a tactical advantage. I think to your point, every athlete is really trying to maximize their own strengths and work around their weaknesses. That's not going to change when you have more information about a competitor, but tactically and how you execute tactics on the road, that might give you a little bit more insight and some advantage there. The other thing to think about on this IP front is this is not always a personal decision. There are some weird clauses in contracts about confidentiality. And sometimes if you're on a team that has specifically a performance director who is maybe the person that's analyzing files, coaching the athletes on the team, they may have clauses in their contracts that say that they're not allowed to divulge this information because the team may view it as proprietary. So it may not always be up to the individual, and that's something to keep in mind. And then on that note, so, mental game is one reason, IP, kind of a proprietary look at the information, is another. Lastly, I think autonomy is a big thing, and you've alluded to this as well. There are so many different personalities in the sport, and some athletes really love to be micromanaged. They don't want to make decisions. They want to be told exactly what to do and have a performance director evaluate their training files and make decisions on a daily basis. Other athletes go crazy under this kind of micromanagement and really, really dislike it. So that may be a part of it too, is not wanting to divulge that information and not wanting to be, micromanaged from all sides, whether that's from a director or from the general public. And the other thing is that power doesn't tell the whole story. So for some of these athletes, if you don't have a performance director that's evaluating power files and you share that information publicly and you make that information more available to the people who are maybe making decisions about who's getting selected for what races, the power files don't always tell the whole story, right? So Mark Cavendish is a great example of this. He's a classic example. His numbers, at that level aren't that impressive compared to other people, but look at what he's doing with them, right? So the numbers don't tell the whole story. And sometimes athletes may fear that putting that information out there may invite judgment that may affect their selection or different contract decisions in a way that's not necessarily reflective of their capabilities as an athlete. And then the last thing I'll say on this is, as a member of the general public who's just a fan, it's super impressive to see these numbers and really awesome and inspiring. But for the athletes themselves, they're constantly looking at who's better, how can they improve. So they're comparing themselves to this teeny tiny fraction of the world's best cyclists. And what for normal folks might seem like major bragging rights, may not feel that way or be perceived that way when the athlete's comparing themselves to the top 0.001%, right? So lots of different reasons for this. Some personal, some may not be within the individual's control, but there's a lot of different reasons that athletes might choose not to share. And we see that some do and have no problem with it because it is really a highly individual decision.
Mm-hmm.
I have some thoughts on this. One, these pro coaches at this level think they have a secret sauce. They don't want to share that because if they share it, someone else can emulate it, and then their worth is like not as high, right? If you don't have something unique, like why do you get paid so much money at this level? Mm-hmm. And if everyone shared it, it would be like this is training data. 2, in stage race, I would not share power files for a team in the middle of a stage race because if I was on another team, I would look at those files and be like, well, how many kilojoules did they put up this day versus that day? I would look at a history of riding. I would see, like, I wouldn't give anyone the whole picture. Maybe one climb or like one race here and there, or like Matthew Van Der Poel's. Yeah,
cherry pick the best ones, right?
Yeah, but it's like, so you could do a few things. One is, wow, that day was a lot harder than normal days on this GC rider, so therefore they're probably a little bit more tired on this day. When you don't really know, like they put out way more energy when there was that split than we thought they did, so they could be more vulnerable. Another thing is, if you could, GC riders, if you could kind of guess their FTP or how much power they could put out on a climb after being fatigued. What I would do is if you had domestiques, be okay, this person, they can hold 330 up this climb. So I'm going to have my domestiques ride at a pace that's going to be like 345. That's going to like burn them, but they're only going to hold it for 4 minutes, right? One after the other. And then our person's going to then attack after that's burned out. So we're going to kind of pre-fatigue them at just above threshold. And you could kind of do math on what that climb is and stuff. That's what I would do for strategy. But the branding aspect, man, when people put out power files, especially if you're not the highest, most popular rider, that like people read about them and they like to discuss them. And it's a great way to, it's like free marketing for your brand as a cyclist. And your brand as a cyclist really influences, I think, how much money you make and how successful your career is. It's not just how well you race. You can not win and have a great brand and make money, which is crazy. So I don't know. There's pros and cons, and those are some of the reasons why I think people do or don't share.
Chad, do you have any thoughts on this?
Not really. Actually, it was fun to be along for that conversation because I've often wondered why they do it. And the only one that's ever cropped up is that it's some strategic advantage, as though the competitors learning of this information can somehow manipulate their strategy to surmount this challenge. And it doesn't work that way. I mean, again, you can do what you can do. It doesn't matter if I know what Chris Froome's numbers are. I mean, right. Chris Froome up 2 or 3 years ago.
Now that I know, watch out, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes for people who are roughly at his level too. They can be right up there. It could be a Mike Woods saying, I can't do that. Or I need to train to be able to do that. And then he throws a big wrench in his particular gears and tries to pursue that avenue of improvement, and he yields what? I mean, he'll probably just derail everything that was working for him in pursuit of one particular thing based on one little bit of data that may not mean everything he thinks it does.
And it's so important to be trained as an individual. I think that's something that we amateurs don't recognize enough for ourselves, but we also don't apply it to this situation in the sense that just because one rider is going out there and doing a huge amount of volume or a huge amount of intensity or a specific type of something, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right approach for you. In fact, it probably isn't the right approach for you. What works for somebody else rarely works for everybody. So, yeah, I think that's Amber, you had great insight on it, and I don't have anything else to add. Eric's question, get ready for the deep dive. It's going to be a good one. He says, I started cycling again about Nate just waved.
Time to go to the bathroom.
Nate's got his bathroom break. He says, I started cycling again about 4 months ago. To give a bit of a background, I cycled competitively as a teenager. And at the time I was very light, about 55 kilograms for 175 centimeters. That's as we call a string bean, right? So that's a person that he mentions when he was younger as a teenager. That's more common to have that sort of build, right? And then as you get older, that changes. He says, I was mostly good at climbing. every junior is really good at climbing, all those kids. So he says, then I switched to strength training and stuck with that for about 20 years. My numbers reflect this. I can produce 1200 watts in a sprint, and that's even without going full gas, as I'm afraid to break my carbon frame on the trainer, as I'm a heavy rider at 90 kilograms. So that's 1200 watts on the trainer. That's quite a lot on a trainer. That's tough to hit. He says, however, my FTP is pretty rubbish at 220 watts, and it only seems to improve in tiny baby steps. Considering I used to be the guy who could do the long sustained effort, but couldn't sprint at all, I was really not explosive back then. Did the 20 years of strength training, with significant time of that being during puberty, shift my muscle fiber makeup from mostly long twitch, or he says slow twitch, to fast twitch is probably a better way to say that. He says, or am I overthinking this? And does it just take a long time to raise FTP, especially if you haven't done endurance training in 20 years? So Chad, this one is a great opportunity to talk about fiber type composition, what we're made of basically, and what all that means. And you've got a lot of fantastic information on it. Where do you want to start?
Well, I'm going to wait for Nate first.
This will be great podcast content. We'll just be quiet for a while. Let him come back.
In order to discuss the concept of fiber type conversion, we have to lay some groundwork here. So I'm going to talk quite a lot about muscle fibers, and a lot of the things will be repeated from what we've discussed in the past, but this is a more consolidated distribution, I guess, of that information. So let's start with what differentiates a slow twitch or an endurance fiber from a fast twitch or a strength fiber. So on the one end of that spectrum, slow twitch fibers are basically low force capacity. They can't push real hard, high fatigue resistance. They can go forever. They favor oxidative metabolism, so aerobic metabolism, and they tend to be smaller fibers. Other end of that spectrum, pretty much the opposite of everything I just described. We have high force capacity, can really push hard, low fatigue resistance, do not last long, favor glycolytic or sugar metabolism, and they tend to be larger fibers. And this kind of reinforces the finding, the observation that there is an inverse relationship between the size of the fiber and its oxidative capacity. So bigger fibers tend to have less endurance, to put it really simply. And this is a bit of a tangent, but we're going to come back to this study a little later by Van Wessel in 2010, where they observed that high oxidative fibers, so fibers that have a lot of aerobic capacity, actually possess a larger capacity for protein synthesis than those fast twitch fibers, yet they remain relatively small. And that's a really fun paper to geek out on, because it actually explains why that is. Why is there this paradox?
Hey, Chad, can I ask you one quick question with this? So there seems to, and sorry, this is going to be a bit of a tangent, but I already see it developing in people's eyes or in people's heads. Slow twitch is very often associated with a specific cadence, like a slower cadence, whereas fast twitch, a lot of people associate it with being faster. And I don't know if this is particularly common in the tri world. That isn't necessarily the case. It isn't like if you have more of one different fiber type composition, you are going to pedal at a specific cadence, correct?
No, it's tied to force output. So I didn't really dip into how twitch relates to that. That is something we can cover at another time, but I'd like to do it justice. But no, sure. that isn't how it works.
It isn't inherently tied, right?
No, it's tied to the amount of force that muscle can output.
Awesome. Cool. Sorry, Chad. Just wanted to nip that one in the bud. I'm sure it was already coming up for some folks. So
sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I hope to clear that up with some of the descriptions I have ahead.
Cool.
Okay. So let's look at muscle fibers genetically. So what fiber types does our heritage bestow upon us? In other words, we could put this as our muscle fiber genotype. So physiologically, again, what types and what compositions are we born with? And an interesting side note is that human muscle appears to be highly heterogeneous, whereas opposed to animal muscle, a little more homogeneous. So we have quite a mix of different types of fiber all within the same muscle, whereas animals seem to be a bit more pure in that respect. And all of this is gleaned from roughly 10, 11 studies that I looked at. So we have to take that grain of salt at all times. Not only is it limited to those studies, but it's also limited to my interpretation of those studies. Okay, so how we classify muscle fibers depends on the method, and there are a number of different methods, and which method you choose can decide or determine how many gradations or hybridizations of these fibers we're looking at. One of the papers I looked at used a particular method that whittled it down, not exactly, to roughly 20 different types of fibers. So you got your slow, your medium, and your fast twitch. And they had all these inclusions in the spectrums between slow and medium and fast. And that's all good and fine, but it's not really germane to what we're concerned with, because us as athletes tend to focus on the 3 main fiber types. And this is determined, these types are determined by the protein composition. It is that simple. And the term used, or the type of distinction or methodology, is myosin heavy chain isoform. So really they're just using the myosin. So if you think of the contractile proteins in a muscle fiber, you got myosin and active. Well, how much myosin it ties strongly to the shortening velocity, or how quickly that muscle can contract. And then the isoform end of that is just saying that it's roughly the same thing, but the proteins in it, the amino acids, might be arranged a little bit differently, or are arranged a little bit differently. So all these things are very similar in nature, but they allow us to create this spectrum. And in particular, with these 3 fibers, we're looking at endurance fibers versus strength fibers, and then the intermediate, which is kind of a strength endurance fiber. Okay. So the endurance fibers are what we refer to as slow twitch, but all of these have a million names. So they're also the type 1 fibers, or the slow oxidative, because they're slow twitch, but they also oxidize fuel, or simply aerobic fibers. Whereas the strength fibers, other end of that spectrum, are the fast twitch, or the type 2Bs, 2X in animals usually. They're the fast glycolytic, fast twitch, and they prefer glycolysis, or simply glycolytic fibers. And then when you marry them, or you find the in-between, there's the strength endurance fibers, and those are the medium twitch, or the 2As, fast oxidative glycolytic, kind of verging more on the fast twitch side of things, but can metabolize both types of fuel, sometimes just called oxidative glycolytic. Moving forward, I'm going to do my best to stick to slow, medium, and fast twitch.
And we thank you for that, Chad.
Yeah, and it conveys everything relevant. It gets it all. Okay, so it's important to recognize that muscle is predominantly 1, typically. And you'll see this described as a preponderance of type whatever fibers, or a predominance of. And while there is evidence of some fibers being pure, most fibers, from what I've gathered from the studies that I looked at, are in fact hybrids. So mixes of. And what's really interesting is this hybridization can actually include all 3 of these fiber types. So within the same muscle, you can have some slow twitch, some medium twitch, and some fast twitch. This is not an unusual thing. It was discovered quite a while ago. I'll describe that a little bit later. Okay, we can also approach this from a different angle, and we can look at a comparison of the types of contractions that take place. So when it comes to strength contractions, these are often labeled tetanic contractions. So I think muscle tetanus, where it stays in a frozen state, because they don't cease until the load is lifted. If you think of a bench press, you don't like push it up a little ways and then back it off, and then push it up and then back it off. You push and push and push until you either lock out, rack the bar, fail, whatever. So they're high force, low speed, and a perfect example is what I just described, a heavy lift. And these rely on recruitment over metabolism to create force. That is the strength of the contraction. Whereas endurance fibers, or endurance contractions, are more bursts of activation. We work and rest, contract and relax. And we do this in the case of cycling with every pedal stroke. And they're lower force, higher speed, and the emphasis is on the frequency of the contraction. So now we're relying on repetition to maintain low levels of intermittent, but persistently so, force. That is the frequency of contraction. So where it gets interesting, and what's especially relevant to bike racers, people who have to compete in mass start events, is what happens when we work a little bit harder, because then we're marrying, or we're verging or combining strength with endurance. We're increasing the force, but we're keeping that same high frequency. So think about threshold repeats, or sweet spot repeats, or even tempo repeats. So anytime we talk about that often misunderstood, or just not understood at all, term muscle endurance or strength endurance, because what we're really describing there is force endurance. These are the fibers that we task with being all things. They do more work. They can deal with shorter recoveries. They have the ability to fuel quickly, or basically turn over ATP quickly. And so all of this lays the ground for what we're going to go back to, which is demands, because demands influence adaptation. And in doing so, Eric, this is where we can start talking about fiber type interconversion, which is also referred to as fiber type switching, more simply. We'll probably stick with that. So a study by Stephen Hardridge, 2007, titled "The Plasticity of Human Skeletal Muscle, Gene Expression to In Vivo Function." And the title kind of says it all. We're talking all the way from our genetic makeup to how we execute, muscle contractions. And in it, he says, and I quote, Human skeletal muscle is a highly heterogeneous tissue, basically what I just said, able to adapt to the different challenges that may be placed upon it. And that's it right there. That we do have the ability to adapt it, but to what extent? So Scott Trapp is another researcher in this field, was quoted as saying in 2012 in an interview with Outside Magazine, with training, you could probably change your fiber type about 10%. And then the article goes on to paraphrase him and says that most people are born with about 50-50 split of slow and fast twitch muscle fibers. But it's clear that if you're a gifted, my emphasis, endurance athlete or sprinter, that you were probably born with more slow twitch or fast twitch fibers respectively. And what this suggests to me is that this is more a matter of genetics than epigenetics, which well, I'm not saying that the epigenetic influence is nothing, because there's certainly something there, but in at least this researcher's opinion, it's not a heck of a lot, 10%. So then the question becomes, how do we as athletes influence fiber switching? It's really simple, through our actions. And when it comes to athletes, we term that training stimuli, right? So what training stimulus are we inflicting on the muscle? So when we couple genetics with these external influences, and those can range from everything as how will you rest, how will you nourish, how will you hydrate, how you manage your stress, and of course, how you exercise, this manifests in your muscle fiber phenotype. So how we're expressing our genetics. The demands determine the adaptation, the term that we've all heard, gene expression. So shifting a muscle's predominance of fiber type is basically changing one muscle's phenotype to another, or at least shifting it to some degree. And what's interesting here is that genetics can give us really different starting points. And a very good example of this goes back almost, 20 years now, with Golnick, and I think it's pronounced Saltine, but Saltin, whatever. They looked at 9 men, 2 women. They biopsied fibers, stained them, did all that. And in particular, they looked at the soleus, which is a low leg muscle, but it's deep to your more obvious gastrocnemius, which is the other muscle they looked at. And then they looked at one of our quads, which is the vastus lateralis, so the outside quad, which is a big driver when it comes to the pedal stroke. So I'm just going to focus on the soleus and the vastus lateralis. So a low leg muscle and a quadricep upper leg muscle. And the soleus averaged about 80%, or it did average 80% slow twitch, whereas the vastus lateralis averaged 52%. So that doesn't tell us much. It tells us that the soleus is predominantly a slow twitch muscle, which kind of makes sense considering its job. Whereas the vastus lateralis, that quadricep, had a pretty even distribution, which also makes sense. But what was very interesting about this is that the ranges were wide. So with the soleus, that lower leg muscle, they were between 64 and 100% slow twitch, which, okay, so it's either really, mostly slow twitch or very slow twitch, but the vastus lateralis went from 13 to 96%. Whoa. So we're talking about athletes that are incredibly slow twitch versus athletes that are incredibly fast twitch. And with that muscle in particular, they looked at 74 different subjects, observed in the realm of about 16,000 different fibers. So they looked at a pretty good cross section of athletes, people, whatever. But the point is that there are clear differences between athletes. What was unclear about the study, and is a little bit of a bummer, but it is an old study, is that I don't know if that was due to genetic predisposition or epigenetic influence. I don't know if they were born that way or they did things to make them that way. But that study aside, other studies do actually clearly support the notion that we can shift this. And one of those is John Hawley's study from 2002, where he found evidence that demonstrated a change in the ratio of our fast twitch to our medium twitch fibers with endurance training. He also noted, and this was roughly 20 years ago, that at the time there was no longitudinal evidence. So they didn't look at athletes starting here up until, follow them through a point, look at them at a later point. No evidence for fast twitch to slow twitch in already well-trained endurance athletes. So, well-trained, maybe this applies to, maybe sedentary people are different, don't know. But, the question then is, has this changed since 2002? And I don't know, I couldn't find anything. If anyone knows of studies that could elucidate that for me, I'd appreciate it, but I couldn't find anything. But in 2015, Naomi Broker noted, quote, changes in oxidative capacity, so our aerobic capabilities, the muscle's aerobic capabilities, can take place without changes in the MHC isoforms. So basically what she's saying is that it's still a medium twitch or a fast twitch fiber, it just has greater oxidative capacity. So it's still classified the same way, it just has a greater ability for endurance, greater ability to oxidize fuel aerobically. So we can influence this. We can shift fibers that are ostensibly one way or actually one way to be a little more the other way. How do we accomplish this? A fancy way to put it is the pattern of neural stimulation influences changes in type. To put it more simply, it's the nature of the contractions that are going to determine which proteins are going to increase, which signaling cascades are going to kick off. Will it veer endurance or strength? And side note, but it's a personal gripe, but it's also something that I'd like to spare people from wasting their time on, is this whole idea of low weight, high repetition work in the gym. And don't get me wrong, that can work. And there is evidence to show that it can work, that if you push low weight to near failure, actual failure, you can incur hypertrophy, you can incur actual improvements in strength. But for most people, this is some nonsense. And you got to consider why. There's no clear signal being sent. You're not picking up loads that are heavy enough to say, I need stronger muscles. You're not repeating the movement of those loads enough times to say, I need greater endurance. You're not sending a clear signal. You pick up a 5-pound dumbbell and curl it 30 times, and reps 27, 28, 29, and 30 are just as easy as reps 4, 5, and 6. It's not a stimulus. You're not getting anything out of that. So save your time.
You're jacked, Chad. I don't know why you have to attack me like this.
I'm just saying, if you're going to go to a gym and you're going to do things, don't make those things what I just described. And it's not a tangent. This is absolutely related, but this does help us understand a little better why concurrent training yields relatively poor results. When we pit strength against endurance, we're effectively creating this steel cage match between fiber size and oxidative capacity. And to return to that Van Wessel paper that describes this paradox, the paper is titled "The Muscle Fiber Type Paradox: Hypertrophy or Oxidative Metabolism?" So it's one or the other. And he notes that high oxidative or slow twitch fibers have a larger capacity for that protein synthesis, yet remain smaller, right? So there's that opportunity to nerd out. But he quotes, a muscle fiber can hypertrophy, get bigger at the expense of its maximum steady state power. And therein lies the rub for all of us as endurance athletes who want to incorporate strength training into our training. We can trigger muscle to increase mass and strength and increase that hypertrophy. We can trigger muscle to increase fatigue resistance, increase that oxidative or aerobic capacity. But when we combine them, we get lesser increases in both, as opposed to focusing on the one. So just an alternative way to state that is that we're pitting fiber synthesis against mitochondrial synthesis. Of course, with degradation in mind. We're never synthesizing, we're also synthesizing and degrading. If we're heavier on the synthesis, we're in positive balance, vice versa, we're in negative balance, et cetera. But it's fibers versus mitochondria. To state it yet another way, it's the size of the fibers versus the contents of the fibers. So do we want bigger fibers that are capable of more force, or do we want endurance fibers that contain more mitochondria, more capillaries, more aerobic enzymes aimed at helping us repeat lower force repetitions?
Also, yes.
Okay.
Yeses.
Yeah. So with all that in mind, I'm just going to distill down the research consensus. And again, the 10, 11 papers, most of them linked here that I looked at. First off, conversion is limited by the original type. So in my words, predominance reigns supreme. So if you start naturally, genetically as a sprint athlete with a ton of fast twitch fibers, you're probably never going to be the best endurance athlete in the world, and vice versa. So your genetics can absolutely work against you if you decide you want to be something other than what they think you ought to be. Conversion is always, quote, always towards slower types. And I'm going to touch back on that, because what this research is saying is that fast twitch can convert to medium twitch can convert to slow twitch, but fast twitch will never go to slow twitch. This simply doesn't occur. Again, this is consensus. It's not to say there aren't studies out there that demonstrate otherwise, but the consensus is that. Now, the interesting exception to this always slower notion is with deconditioning, or simply unloading. And the trend there is that slow twitch fibers actually become more like fast twitch fibers. They shift their characteristics from oxidative ones to more glycolytic ones. So put another way is your fast twitch fibers increase while your medium twitch and your slow twitch decrease. And conversely, most training, and most training, even strength training, decreases your type 2B or your fast twitch fibers in lieu of typically medium twitch fibers, even to a point where there's actually no presence of type 2B fibers. And I linked to that study because that's yet another one to geek out on. So in terms of deconditioning, Scott Trapp, who I touched on earlier, did a study in 2004 where he looked at the maintenance of muscle function and the composition of the fibers during long periods of unloading, and long periods. In this case, it was 84 days. And it had to do with considering astronauts in a state of weightlessness, but also people who were restricted to bed rest. And the main finding is, as we've talked about many times, doesn't take much. Very little maintenance is actually required. And as we know, it's pretty easy to work in. So in the case of these, not even athletes, these subjects that were subjected to 84 days of bed rest, all they had to do was 4 sets of 7 max reps, to as hard as they could push every third day. So we're talking less than 30 reps every third day. So on average, 10 reps a day, not much work. With the ones who actually did the exercise, they didn't see changes. Their muscles stayed the same size. They maintained relatively the same function. Everything stayed really similar. But the people who were on full bed rest totally tanked, just as we might expect. But what's interesting is that prior to the bed rest, both groups had minimal hybrid fibers. They only had about 13%. Everything else was reasonably pure, I guess. Post study, the bed rest group increased to 49%. So now they're like 50, half of their fibers are hybrid fibers, whereas the group with exercise increased to about 31%, which is interesting in and of itself, but it shows even inactivity can cause a shift in fiber type. What's also interesting is that bed rest group, this was the first study, and I touched on this earlier, to report slow twitch, medium twitch, and fast twitch fibers. So all the fiber types in the same muscle. And then with both groups, whether it was the bed rest or the bed rest with a little bit of strength work, the hybrids came at the expense of the slow twitch fibers. So we had slow twitch to increasingly glycolytic conversions. Why? Because that's how they're being used. I mean, there's no need for oxidative capacity. They're not doing anything that even vaguely mimics endurance work. And only the bed rest group was doing something that, though strength work was still probably more veering toward endurance work. But the point is that demands dictate the fiber characteristics. A final side note, and this is just something I wanted to cover, but I figure there's probably already enough information to process as it is that there is evidence, and I linked 2 studies, that fiber typology, our fiber composition, can impact both our rate of recovery when it comes to high intensity training and the incidence of overreaching and how we supercompensate. And I linked to both those papers because I'm not saying pigeonhole yourself and say, oh, I'm mostly a fast twitch athlete, this is always going to be my plight. That's not necessarily the case, but these are a couple of papers that should provide some good food for thought. So my conclusion, Eric, is that based on the research, the 10, 11 papers I looked at, is you probably have the same level of influence you always had. If you have it at one point, you probably still have it. I don't know why it would go away. And any so-called damage to your endurance capacity can be reduced with training. You just have to do the work. So if you're improving in your performance capabilities by, small upticks here and there, I'm thinking it's something else. There may be a fiber type influence, but I really don't think that's what you need to concern yourself with.
I mean, the majority of us improve in small increments, do we not? I mean, that's how it works. When you first start training, you might have, a big ramp up and rapid improvement, but then over time, it always becomes more incremental. So that's, somewhat to be expected. So Chad, to recap, the fast twitch, slow twitch, medium twitch fibers, your muscles can be composed of all 3. And you can shift them, but it's really you're a product of your environment, the training that you're doing. But that doesn't mean that you do irreversible change. You can change it back as well over time within reason.
Plasticity is the term. And what changes you can make aren't going to be huge ones. So don't bank on the fact that your training is going to turn you into a very different athlete from what you are right now. You can emphasize strengths and you can train weaknesses, but you're probably not going to completely flip-flop in terms of one type of athlete into another.
That's great news for a lot of us athletes that probably heard this and think like, oh, well, I am that type of rider. And we tend to put ourselves in a box because of this. That's good news that we can.
Well, and as importantly, I mean, what Scott Trapp says is that we're all basically starting from a 50-50 point anyways. That's where we are. So we can kind of shift that one way or the other with our training. So it's really unlikely that anyone, well, I won't say really unlikely, but it's less common that people are distinctly one thing. I mean, Usain Bolt's probably never going to be a Tour de France climber, right? And Roman Bardet is probably never going to outsprint Usain Bolt. So those are extremes on that spectrum, but most of us fall more toward the middle.
That's a great visual, by the way. Just thinking Romain Bardet sprinting against Usain Bolt.
It's Wout van Aert, though, thinking about what he did in the Tour, which is crazy. Like he can sprint and he can do extremely long climbs, which just does not make sense.
It's amazing. I think the only outstanding question after all of covering all of that, Chad, is Nate, where are you and I going to go to get our muscle biopsies?
I just asked in the chat. I don't know. Somebody, I keep asking.
If you're listening to this and you have an avenue to get us in to get some muscle biopsies, please let us know. We'd be interested in finding out our fiber type composition and just seeing what that is. It'd just be an interesting point of note. And Chad, you're going to come too, right?
Sure, I'll go. I'm not going to get a biopsy.
Scary.
Yeah,
it's scary.
Yep.
Big,
he doesn't like pain.
big muscle guy making fun of me for lifting 5-pound weights, but he's scared to get a biopsy. So, all right, let's go into rapid fire stuff. Brian says, I finally witnessed pre-race Jonathan in person at National Championships this weekend, and all I can say is, wow, he looked angry, or maybe it was just focus. What does he do to get in this pre-race mood? And is everybody like that? And am I just messing up by being cheerful?
He's showing his true self. That's what it is. And
the rest of my life
comes down.
The rest of my life is an act. It's all a sham. It's just that one moment pre-race when I'm my truest self. Yeah,
that's why he likes it.
Sure.
But my question would be, how much of this pre-race attitude actually ties to your initial impressions when you roll across the line, with whether you're disappointed with sixth or ecstatic about sixth? I mean, when you go into it with that mindset, do you think it has any impact on how you feel post?
I don't know. I haven't considered that, but I feel like it would have to in some way. For me, it's just focus, and I just have I have a resting mean face, perhaps. But it's just focus, and I don't know if maybe one person needs more focus or than another. People focus differently. For me, it's about removing all other distractions and just focusing in on that. So I apologize when I'm pre-race. I'm not thinking of anybody else. I'm not looking at anybody else. I don't mean to do that. I'm probably just staring off into space, but very much focused on what I have to do for the race. So, but everybody's not that way, right? I don't know. Amber, are you that way?
It depends on the day, but I would just say, yeah, you're not messing anything up. Everybody is really individual in terms of the headspace that they need to be in on the start line. So some people really need to bring the stress level down. And for some people, that means chatting and making jokes and laughing and having a good time. And for other people, that's going internal and trying to tune out what's going on around them. It's really, really individual. So don't feel like you're messing anything up. It's just figuring out what you need as an individual to get yourself in the headspace that's going to be the most effective for you.
If I can add, the more I raced, the more relaxed I became and the more social I became pre-race and the more fun I had racing. So and I don't know if that's chicken or the egg. If I was racing more, so it became more fun, or if I'm not sure what explains it, but there was a distinct correlation between how much I raced, how relaxed I was prior, how much fun I took away from that exposure.
The one thing
go ahead.
Sorry, Nate, please, you first.
I said I'm pretty happy before races, and I actually like talk and joke in the middle of a race. I think a lot of people don't like that. Whatever, though, it's fun. Like, it's fun. I only get upset if someone's doing like something blatantly. They're doing something dangerous on purpose. That's bad. Like triggers me.
Yeah, I feel like I should probably differentiate. I'm not angry. I'm also not nervous. I think that I could be fooling myself, but I've raced in one form or another so many times in my life, whether it was skiing, motorcycles, bicycles, and I don't experience pre-race nerves. Instead, it's all about, just focus. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just how I kind of operate, I guess, and get into the zone. And your mileage may vary. Okay. The next one is from Kevin. He says, without giving too much away and this one's Nate, this one's definitely in your wheelhouse. Without giving away too much in the future with business strategy, are there plans at TrainerRoad to conduct or publish any training studies with access to historical individual rider data, potential built-in double-blind training protocol with adaptive training, and a potential large sample size of male, female, age, etc.? The results could be really fascinating. He says, or is the lack of controlled laboratory environment with additional sensor data other than power and heart rate an inhibitor to drawing valid conclusions?
Well, it's funny too, because that's one of our engineers asked the same question. A lot of the labs and the a lot of the things that you see in labs are using the same equipment that you have at home. Like there's not an extra like fancy kicker that does even better power, or an extra power meter that's more accurate than what we have today. They might use a different bike and stuff, but they're very, very similar in terms of like how precise they are and accurate. So we are working with a pretty famous PhD. We haven't talked about like saying who it is, but so I don't want to say it, but you probably know their name. But they were working with our adaptive training team to do this thing, is get insights into our training, to ask questions and see if we can pull information out. Although the guidance they have from me is not to publish anything that's secret sauce, because we're a business. We're not, a university. But if there's other stuff that is not as secret, or it's farther down the line, if we have 12 secrets, maybe we can publish one secret and then show that to people to move the sport forward. But it's really about making a product that is better than everybody else for us. So the answer is maybe, but it's definitely not. That's not the goal. It's like a side product, and it's almost like a marketing thing for us to be able to publish data that is different. And the nice thing is that it's the large sample size that gets it to be better. So if we have, tens of thousands or more people inside of something, some of that inaccuracy or some of the variability of data that might happen kind of gets flushed out in that if you look at a very large population. Where if you have, some studies have 8 riders, you better make sure they're on the same equipment and everything's like dialed, right? And that's what they do.
Yes, this is from the marketing team's perspective. This is one of this is a big focus of ours. But the thing that we have learned, and I'm sure that many people listening to this that have dealt with data at this sort of level, is there's a lot of responsibility and a lot of due diligence you have to make sure that the data that you're actually doing so ethically. It's very easy to just even make a mistake and make it not representative of reality. It's tricky. In my mind, originally, I was like, this is so easy. We just pull the data and it's done. Check the box. But
you check the data yet?
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely more complex to that, but it's of absolute interest to us. And we want to be able to share training insights with that. So
that's why it's good to have a PhD look at it, and then they can do the whole thing, especially if they publish the data, then they can go through their standard peer review stuff where you don't have, maybe an overeager marketer see something and be like, "Ooh, that's this, let's publish it." And there's nuances and all that sort of stuff too. That's why it's so hard to discuss some of this stuff too in the forum, is some things that we know we don't say because it's like a competitive advantage. So it's tough to get into an argument, not an argument, a constructive debate about.
Nice. Well done.
About how this stuff.
Next one's from John. He says, best box pancake mix. Do you spice it up or just add water? Curious to hear from Alex and Keegan, especially. I think that we should defer to them. Keegan says, my go-to race mix is Krusty's. And you can expect this level of detail from these two, by the way. This is much more than you bargained for. If I had to buy a box for normal breakfast, it would be Kodiak cakes. Krusty's is straight race fuel, though. High carb, limited protein, just white flour. Kodiak mix is a bit heavier in the stomach for me, at least, with more fiber and protein. Also, I always add an egg and milk to any box mix because it makes it way better. So that's from Keegan. And from Alex, he says, King Arthur gluten-free, good sodium content and great flavor. I normally just add 1 egg and water. And if I'm feeling adventurous, I'll add some cinnamon and vanilla extract. These guys live on the edge, really wild. So, Alex, by the way, if you are going to Tahoe Trail 100 this weekend, I'm sure plenty of podcast listeners are listening to this. Alex Wild's going to be there. If you want to talk to him, you can absolutely do that. He's going to be there tomorrow during like the athlete meeting and stuff. Go up and say hi. Alex is a super nice guy. Go tell him amazing job at National Championships too, because he just did an incredible job at that race.
Alex has
also, you can find him on top of the podium at the end of the race.
Well, I'm sure he has the #1 race plate because he won. Last time they had it was 2 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah, and he won. So it's good. It's a big race. He beat Stetna there, I believe so.
Yep. Yeah. Stetna, Leipheimer, some fast folks. I know that all of you were saying Leipheimer's retired. Levi's still very fast. So he
was. I think he did the tandem. Right.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Forgive me. Yep. I messed that up.
The team competition,
the team
tandem.
one. Yeah. Tandem would be sweet. Rose says, on Sportives, I see people consuming gels to cover about 90 grams an hour and stopping at feed stations. So if you can only process roughly 90 grams per hour, that's not confirmed, by the way, that we can only process that much. But it says, is there any benefit in stopping at feed stations to take on additional nutrition, or is carrying that extra food in your stomach just unnecessary? I have thoughts on this. Amber, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Sometimes the snacks are just good.
Exactly. Same brain. Yes.
Do you really need a Cinnabon? Like, but they taste delicious.
But they're amazing.
Yeah, they make
Actually, what I'm thinking of is fluffernutter sandwiches, which I didn't grow up on the East Coast, so I didn't know about this until I did a Grand Fondo where they had fluffernutter sandwiches at the stops, and it was mind blowing, and it changed my life. So it's a sandwich with peanut butter and marshmallow fluff.
Whoa.
Amazing. Absolutely.
That sounds disgusting.
Earth-shattering discovery.
My kids need lunch tomorrow, though, and that sounds like a amazing
winner.
Like for kids, that sounds really good. They just they're at like
it's
a
like
summer
a giant
camp.
s'more. Yeah.
They open their lunch and be like, "What is this? Oh, I don't want it." And they take a bite and then be like, "You're the best dad ever." Okay, I'm gonna Google it. Let's make these.
So good, I'm telling you.
I just had a question for Ro.
Yeah.
How many bathroom stops are these people making? Because they're already getting that high quantity of carbohydrate on the ride, and then they're piling this on top of it. That seems like a recipe for a whole lot coming through the system.
I doubt somebody is taking in 90 grams an hour through, drink mix gels and stopping there and doing that long-term throughout a sportive, because like you said, Chad, it's going to make you detour very regularly.
You just get full.
Well, you just get full, Nate, but the rest of us don't have an iron gut. We explode. So it would tear me apart. I like, if I'm doing a sportif though, I do not want to I'll have stuff to be able to take in my own nutrition and take in that 90 grams an hour, but I am going to hammer those aid stations, like potato chips, pretzels, peanut butter and jelly. I don't care what it is. Like that's part of the sportif experience to me.
That's why I do sportifs. It's like a rolling buffet. I mean,
yeah,
I just go
exactly.
Exactly.
Yes.
Eat and feel all right about overindulging.
We have a ride here called the Edible Pedal, and you just ride around to incredible aid stations where they have like local restaurateurs stay there and they provide all the food at each aid station. That's the sort of Grand Fondo we all need. So yeah. Michael says, rapid fire, in my in-depth listening to the podcast, I have now adapted to a 4.1 or 4-to-1 ratio for my recovery shake. My question is, would eating during that time frame, and he's talking about that time frame of post-workout, I assume, make the ratio void? Should I only have a shake for 60 minutes and then eat and try to get the maximum benefit, but feel like I'm eating and throwing off some purpose of the shake? This is we are cyclists. This is totally us to ask this sort of question.
What if I do 4 to 1.5 ratio?
Yeah.
Very granular.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Amber, what say you on this one? If you take in a recovery drink of 4-to-1 and then you eat something within that window, did you just ruin the recovery shake and its intentions?
No, absolutely not. I think so. One thing to say is the 4-to-1 ratio. Part of the reason that we cite that is that specific ratio has been used in studies and shown to be effective. Okay. Does that mean that it's the only thing that it's effective? No, it does not mean that. So we know that it is effective. We also know that it's possible that other things are effective. And I think part of the reason that it is effective is for the signaling purpose. So when you take that in, that specific ratio triggers a signaling cascade that kind of gets the ball rolling with some of these processes that we know are important for recovery. If you have solid food or a regular meal or a burrito or something after you've had that recovery shake, it's not going to throw that signaling off. And recovery is as much about feeling satiated, enjoying your food, as it is about getting the right nutrients in. So I really wouldn't worry about it. If you have a recovery shake and you're super hungry, or you're hanging out with your friends and you guys are at a burrito shop at the end of the ride, enjoy yourself, right? It's not.
But
it's
wait,
not
the burrito.
all just one thing. What's that mean?
First, take it apart, measure it, components, put it back together, and then enjoy it thoroughly.
Alex Wilde is like, yeah, here's what you do. Please go on the website and figure out what they say.
Oh my goodness.
I think one question I have with the signaling and this type of 4-to-1, I think in the studies, I don't know this for sure, but I want to see what were they doing during the ride? were they eating 100 grams of carbs per hour, or were they kind of getting depleted and then they did this? And I wonder if there is a difference if I'm taking in, on my 2-hour ride, 1,000 calories of carbohydrate. If I can just add some protein and that has the same signaling aspect after it, versus if I do let's say a 2,000 kilojoule ride and I take no carbohydrate in, and then I do, I guess I wouldn't do 1,000 calories of carbs, but yeah, 1,000 calories. Anyways, you know what I'm saying? The difference between those two things. And I'm wondering if there is a difference. And if anyone has that, please post it in the forum on this episode and at me. That'd be very interesting to know if there is a difference between that.
One thing I can speak to on that is what the research indicates is the better you fuel during your ride, the less important it is to get the recovery shake in. So it doesn't mean that it's not important, because there's two components of the recovery, right? When we're talking about recovery from this perspective, we're looking at replenishing glycogen stores for one piece of that. And then also there's the muscle repair and synthesis other component of it. There's mental and emotional recovery as well. So there's a lot of different facets of this, but if you are fueling really, really well and consistently throughout your ride and you don't get too far behind on your fueling, then you will be able to replenish your glycogen stores a lot faster than you would otherwise. And so the recovery shake and the timing of it becomes way more important if you do fall behind in your fueling. I know that's not a complete answer to your question, but it's a piece of it. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, it's perfectly stated, because what sort of hole do you carve out? I mean, do you approach it as Nate, who knows exactly I'm getting 110 grams per hour? I know because everything is very quantifiable, versus what I do, which is wait till I'm hungry and then just completely fall apart in the waning hours. The holes at the end of the competitions are very different. And we've seen that. I mean, like visually seen it. It's ugly.
Well, it's also very applicable to probably the majority of us listening to this. Us amateur cyclists, we suck at fueling. We have a lot of room for improvement in terms of
some of us do.
Some. Yeah.
One of us here does.
Generally speaking, amateur cyclists struggle with fueling compared to what they should be doing. They don't nourish enough on the bike. They don't take in enough fuel. It's really common. So these recovery drinks are even more important in that case, for sure. So I don't take in recovery drinks. I take in, usually I make it so that I can have a good meal thereafter. And it's like really high quality food and that sort of stuff. But it's probably because I can't find any sort of recovery drink that doesn't mess with my gut. Maybe vegan protein options, if anybody has any suggestions on that, but it always seems to mess with my gut. And then that having my gut messed up probably puts me even further behind of just not having a recovery drink. So then I might as well just take in high quality food thereafter. And then that's probably getting me into roughly the same spot, I would assume. Hope.
Chad, what are you going to do at Cape Epic? Do you have a plan?
That's my biggest source of grief right now, or consternation, whatever.
Me too.
I don't know. Because I mean, if I look at like CIS gels, which are science and sport gels, which I like a lot, they're 22 grams. I mean, I have to pack 5 of those per hour if I'm going to shoot for the high end of what I think I might be able to eventually tolerate, which, I mean, we're talking 6, 7, 8 hours. I can't pack that many gels. So I got to make sense of what the aid stations are going to be. Obviously, I'm going to have to put some calories in fluid, which is probably the way I'll end up going, but it's going to be a challenge. And like I stated earlier, before I had my training disruption, I was gradually nudging up my carbohydrate intake and tolerating it, dealing with it incrementally, but now I've fallen way behind that. So I have to rekindle that. And it's worrisome. I feel like maybe I'll start out with some solid food early on and just beg Pete to go slower and then try to hobble through the remaining hours. I don't know. That's my biggest concern.
Did you actually lose your ability to process carbs? Like,
I tie all that to, speculation, right? If I take in this many carbohydrates and I feel ill, I feel sick, I feel almost fluish, well, probably not really tolerating that amount of carbohydrate. So if I don't encounter that, if I nudge it up a little more gradually and I don't hit that, then I'm probably tolerating that amount. So I was just kind of siphoning, or I don't know what the right term is, but just gradually bringing it up, and I wasn't having those issues. Whereas if I just I'm going on a long ride today, I'm just going to dump carb into the system and hope for the best.
Yeah.
That didn't pan out.
But I mean, your training interruption. So I stopped training for a bit too with my divorce, and then I came back and just banged the carbs that like it didn't go down. I was good to go right away.
So your diet, and I've observed this too, your diet in the interim probably still favored carbohydrates. I have a tendency to shift protein and fat for whatever reason. I mean, I get a fair amount of carbohydrates in there, but if fat is a substantial portion of your diet, I mean, that covers so much satiety and so much caloric input in one fell swoop that I don't have much room or hunger left for carbohydrates. So I'm making a marked effort to reduce my fat intake simply so that I can put more carbohydrate into the system and be hungry for that carbohydrate and, eventually create or, increase that number of and gut enzymes that will allow me to tolerate that level of carbohydrate intake.
That's the biggest between Chad and our diets. It's the fat intake. Mm-hmm. Chad's very heavy on the fat and I'm very light on the fat.
Not very, but to a point where it's higher and it cuts into what I can do on the carbohydrate side of things.
The last rapid fire question that we all get to answer is, how is Nate going to do at Cape Epic? It's not on our doc. I'm just throwing this in right now. I'm so concerned. Like you
concerned
have like
for who, me or Sophia?
Both. So Sophia just won Crusher in the Tusher, a big gravel event on a mountain bike, and she won it by minutes. And she was just like, yeah, I kind of had a rough day. And she still won it by minutes over like some heavy hitters. She's so fast. She's going to Tokyo.
She can push me. I'm serious.
Is Nate going to be okay? Like, this is going to be rough. I have more confidence at this point in Chad and Pete making it through than you, because I feel like Chad and Pete are going to be tortoise. They're going to be consistent. They're going to have their pace. They're going to lock in and make it. But you, I feel like, are probably going to have times where you go faster, higher, more intense. And I just don't know if you can. I mean, I don't even know if I can sustain for 8 days, John, but I'm worried about you. So
don't cut this out and use it against me later. But
get those scissors ready, everybody.
You've ridden with me many, many times. I think on Strava, I've ridden with you the most of anyone.
Yeah.
Have I ever, when people try to push me or all that sort of stuff, do I ever just give into it?
No, you don't.
And like, ever. So if Sophia's like, we got to go, I'll just be like, I can't. This is science. I can't go for 400 watts up this climb to go with you. I need to be at 300 or 320 or something.
I'm envisioning Nate getting dropped. This is science. Getting dropped.
And she'll get us disqualified if she drops me too much. Like, I am the governor. I am technically in control of our pace.
You are the one who drops.
Yeah, I actually dropped.
Sorry. Go check Nate's TikTok for that one. But Nate is the one that's actually getting drops.
The slower person is in control, right? That's like the thing. So I'm not gonna just, she bangs out up a hill. I'm just gonna be like, I can't do it. I'm not gonna try to follow her the first hour of a 35-hour race and be like, I'm gonna do it. It's gonna magically happen.
Do we have to stay within a certain gap of our
1 minute?
With the whole time over the
they're
the entire
only
course.
Going to get it over like timing mats, but you got to be within 1 minute. So
at each timing mat. Okay.
Yeah, everyone's pretty much the same. I think on a descent, maybe Sophia would do a little bit bigger gap. I think that happens sometimes, and then you just kind of regroup at the bottom of the descent.
Here's what I think.
It's hard to look.
I think Nate's going to surprise himself, and I think you're going to surprise all of us. And I think what's going to happen is you are going to learn a lot each day about the course and the technical aspects, but I also think that you and Sophia are going to learn about each other really quickly. And I think she's going to get to a point where she can really motivate you to do some things that you didn't think you could. I do really believe that. I know we joke about Sophia's just going to like push you and you're just going to push back. But I think that you guys are going to find a good balance. I think you'll surprise yourself.
She'll quickly recognize the futility of that strategy. She's going to know that after a day, that's not going to work. I mean, she can't just bury Nate and expect that he's somehow, I mean, he's already said he's resistant to that approach anyway, but even if he got past that psychologically, there are still physiological limitations that won't allow it.
And on the flip side, I will say for as much as we joke about this, we all have the utmost respect for Sophia, and Nate in particular has such deep respect for her. I feel like I do think that coming from that perspective, I think that you're going to find some depths of strength you didn't know you had.
I think so
I
too.
really do.
So I never surprise myself because I believe in myself. I do surprise other people all the time. So I agree with that. And I will do that. I think this will happen is we'll be slower than Sophia will like on the first day, and then slower on the second and third day. But then on the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, as it goes into it, I think I will not degrade as much as other people or other people in the race, and my descending skills will get better because we'll be like the most mountain biking I've done in my entire life, probably.
If you
outside.
don't get fatigued. Yeah. If you don't get fatigued.
Well, the fatigue part is about eating a ton. And I think I will be able to block in some good days. So I'm going to sleep a ton and eat a ton. And that's why I think more than probably my goal is to be on the podium for sleeping and eating more than anyone else in the entire race.
Yeah.
No, but really, if I could get 10 hours a night and eat way more than I should, that will really help as you get in further into the days. And this is barring crashes that are enough to really hurt us, because that's the knock on wood, but that's assuming that there's no giant crashes that we hurt ourselves.
I'm just super curious to see how this weekend goes. That's like the first indication of where you're at. And then you have 12 weeks. It's going to be bad. I think you have 12 weeks to get yourself in fighting shape for this one. It's not a lot.
Okay. Is it John?
Are you worried yet?
Am I worried? I am disappointed that it wasn't in January, because that would have been great for me. And we have 94 days until Cape Epic, which is pretty quick.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm feeling a little bit sick today, right before the race. Going to do a stretch VO2 max, trying to bump it up, but I have a little mask so I don't spread it with anybody and hide in my office.
Oh boy. Okay. I'm going to, Amber, it's okay. Is it okay if I take some liberties and kind of summarizing the next questions? Then we can just have more of a discussion about this. So we got, I counted, and there's probably more since then. I counted 17 questions that we got over the space of a week where somebody was either involved in a crash or narrowly missed a crash, and they're asking questions about this. And in every case, they're just coming back to racing. So a lot of us are in that boat where it's like first races are happening. And it's pretty sketchy. And I think we've all seen it, whether it was with Tulsa Tough when that launched, in my experience there, and the other races that we saw, or if you just pay attention to the internet at all, you can see the amount of crashing. Even at the Pro Peloton, there's been insane amounts of crashes, and not just from people holding cardboard signs. So it's been a lot. So there's a question here, Chad, where basically somebody is saying, I'm terrified of crashing, and I am thinking that I should just move up and race a higher category to avoid the crashing that occurs in lower categories. And I wanted to get your thoughts in particular on that, because I know that you feel a certain way about people moving up categories, perhaps earlier than they should.
Yeah, I don't think that should ever be the motivation for advancing categories. If you have the ability to do it, it's not going to get any safer. People still do dumb stuff. Big fields still provide or present a lot of variables. Conditions change. There are just too many things that you can't control for. And by advancing more quickly than I think is appropriate, you're not bypassing any of those. They're still going to be there. So take your time, advance, get the wins, learn how to be comfortable in a group, period. Doesn't matter if that group's fast moving and strung out or slow moving and bunched up. It's still dangerous, tricky stuff. And you can learn tons from being in those slower, quote, sketchier categories. You're not going to go from being a Cat 4 in sketchy circumstances and move up to a Cat 3, and it's going to be like, oh, this is so much better. It's not going to be that much better. And it's not going to be that much better when you move up to 2s or 1s or Pro 1-2. It's just not. So stay where you are, get from those lower categories what you can get from those lower categories, and move up at a more natural rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's this assumption that you get to Cat 1-2, and it's this like perfectly organized group ride. Nate, you're shaking your head.
It's like, I think it's scarier. It's tighter. Agreed. And people are bumping you and stuff. And in my, I watch the races, there's just as many crashes in those upper ones. Everyone's like Cat 5 is a crash fest, but I feel like it's conventional wisdom. Seeing a P12 like crash in the sprint is horrifying. And that happens in NorCal where in the lower categories is more spread out, but people are like drilling it, and they're so much faster, and it's so much more competitive in the sprint than in a Cat 5 or something where you can you're kind of by yourself and everyone's not doing it. There's other ones, like watch the Williams Brothers stuff, Watch those sprints and like how they're touching in crits and stuff, and be like, do you want to be in that? It is crazy. Like the Tyler Williams crash at Nationals. That one's scary too. Like it's just, oof. Like I do not think it's getting better. And then you look at the pro peloton, look at the Tour de France. They're the best in the world. Right? Amber, there are a lot of crashes in your World Tour.
Oh yeah.
Right? It wasn't like crash free. I would say there's more crashes in that than in like Cat 5 stuff. If they would have put Cat 5 riders all the time, it's like multiple crashes a day. It's crazy.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I think that I understand the logic behind it based on the conventional wisdom that exists. But I also think that you learn at a more reasonable pace when you're in those lower categories. Everything happens really fast the higher you go in terms of the levels. Yes, in terms of speed, but also just a whole lot more CPU power is being used because there's a lot of people that know exactly where to be. So all those people are fighting to be in that spot. You don't have that quite as much when you get to the lower categories. Everybody isn't aware of the exact spot where you need to be, so they're not fighting for it quite as much. Yes, there's some absent-minded moves, but it doesn't have that kind of consensus that really just makes it so that it's a danger magnet.
That's a good point. Yeah. The Cat 5 crashes or lower levels is usually because someone is either goofing around or not paying attention. The P1-2 crashes are because they are aggressively trying to race a certain way, and they know they're like doing this on purpose. They are touching or moving into this thing on purpose, and then that's what happens. And as long as you get in that race where everyone's kind of like the lower levels, people are paying attention, they give space, right? There's more room in a Cat 5, Cat 4 race than in a P1-2. P1-2 is so close. It's like your bars are touching other people's bars. That never happened to me in a Cat 4 race.
Right. There's literally less room for mistakes as you upgrade through the categories. Exactly. And when you say, people are doing it on purpose, they're not purposefully trying to crash, but they are making intentional, calculated risks in a situation where there is very, very little room for error. And they're walking a very razor's edge because they can most of the time. But if so to be in that situation, you need to have built a very specific and deep skill set in order to manage that. And that's part of the reason that we have the category system, because you're learning at each of those levels, like Jonathan said, where in Cat 5, Cat 4, you have a lot more room to make mistakes, literally in terms of time and space to react to what's going on around you. And I 100% agree with this whole conversation that I think it's a kind of an unfortunate misunderstanding. It's not the case that, all the crashes happen in Cat 5 and all you have to do is upgrade. Everything's going to be rainbows and puffy clouds. Not the case.
Yes. Yeah. Amber, there's another question with this, and I think that this should be kind of boots on the ground, helpful information for people, like rubber meeting the road. What other tips do you have about predicting and identifying, avoiding risky situations mid-race in a criterium? Let's address that one before the following questions, because that's like, there are a lot of people that are in a race and they're just terrified because they feel like they don't know where the crash is going to happen. So you're always on edge because you feel like a crash could happen at any moment and it feels really out of your control. Right. But then there's the other side of trying to look ahead and trying to kind of identify things that could cause crashes. How do you do that?
It's a skill set. So one of the big things I want to say with this is that confidence is like 80% of this equation, because if you are confident and calm when you respond to whatever's going on around you, you're actually going to respond, not react. And let's just take as a concrete example, if you are really freaked out because you're thinking about how much you don't want to crash, you're literally going to be tense on the bars. You're probably not going to be looking where you need to be looking in order to be aware of what's going on around you. You might be staring at the ground instead of having more of an open focus and being spatially aware of a broader range around you. Those are things that are physically going to make you more likely to crash, right? Whereas if you are relaxed and supple on the bike, if your focus is open so that you can be aware of how riders are moving maybe in a 180 degree span around you, those are things that are really going to help. And so I like an analogy I like to use with this is defensive driving. It's not about driving scared. it's about being aware and proactive. So leaving enough space between you and the car in front of you is one thing. And so if that person does something stupid or unpredictable, you have the time and space to respond appropriately and in a way that's going to be safe. So that's kind of the mental model that you want to have with this. So I think a lot of people conflate this idea of racing aggressively or assertively with racing outside your skill set. No, you can race within your skill set and still be assertive in a race. It doesn't mean that you're giving up wheels, but it means that you're going to put yourself in positions where you visibly have an out, or you have enough space to move or to keep your front wheel safe. So I think that just keeping that in mind, it's not about being fearful or aggressive. It's about being aware, relaxed, and proactive as much as you can, so that if something happens, you have that escape route. You know exactly what you need to do to handle the situation, and that's going to keep you a lot safer.
Another question that we had, and these kind of, I'm going to insert one, Amber, then we'll go to the last one that we have, the number 2 point. But one of the questions is how to crash more safely. And forgive me, tied in with this too is another question where somebody asked, why do cyclists break their collarbones so often? Chad, can you chime in on the collarbone one, and then we can get into tips on crashing safely?
Yeah, that's a quick one. and I already suspected this, but I did actually plug it into the Google, and it confirmed what I thought. Is it's not just cyclists. That is the most frequently, well, according to a number of resources, John Hopkins being one of them, it's one of, if not the most frequently broken bone in the body. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, just the actual shape of the bone, it's a long, slender bone, doesn't have a whole lot of musculature around it. I mean, you can grab it at any time, right? And it bears a lot of force in the case of falls, whether you're falling on your shoulder or whether you're doing it with, God forbid, outstretched hands. Ton of force is transmitted through what is not a very well supported and not a very well structured bone. So it just happens. Add to that the fact that a lot of endurance athletes especially are probably malnourished, and that malnourished can translate to osteopenia, osteoporosis, either way, weak, brittle bones, bird bones, as I put it often. That's a recipe for a broken clavicle.
It is the circuit breaker of your body. So when you crash, if you want something to absorb the impact, you don't want your neck to break, your spine or your head. Having just that bone break is the best thing, so that it kind of absorbs more. It's like a crumple zone for your body, and that's why it happens more often. But it's something like an incredibly small amount of pressure. And I want to say, I know in like martial arts, they're like, you can karate chop the clavicle and beat them, right? Everyone's told that as a kid.
That was exactly the example I was going to use. I think back to my martial arts days in my 20s or something, and I remember my martial arts instructor saying, it only takes 10 pounds of pressure to break a clavicle, or whatever the number may have been.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Rex
seems like not very much, because that means I could just I could rest on your clavicle and just break it, right? Just lean on you and it would break.
Yes,
which I don't think is true. Not this one though. This one's got 9 screws and a plate. Like, it is strong, which I'm kind of scared about, because then I think it'll just break in a different area now. Hopefully my neck doesn't break.
Your crumple zone is now a stiff zone, no longer a crumple zone.
I just jinked myself, didn't I? Mountain bike race.
I want to add one thing to this too. Many cyclists are adult onset athletes that are racing in amateur bike racing. And whether it's because we didn't do something when we were a kid, or it's been years since we've done something like gymnastics or martial arts or something like that, we aren't the best at tumbling, and we aren't the best at falling either. And there's a lot of skill involved in falling right. Sorry, go ahead, Chad.
Sorry to interrupt. I've made this argument before, and I absolutely stand by it. Learning to fall, it is a skill. It's not something that comes naturally in the heat of the moment. And I do recognize that some crashes happen so fast, there's no time to consider what's going to happen. It's just on you, and you're left looking up at the sky wondering what just happened to me. But in some cases, and especially in the lower ranks, where, as Amber described, you leave yourself a little bit of time, a little bit of space. You have that half second to say, instead of reaching out with my hands or letting go of my bars, I'm going to hold my bars and I'm going to roll my shoulder inward. And you don't develop those habits if you don't know how to tumble, if you don't know how to fall, if you don't know how to be in a handstand and fall out of a handstand, or jump into a forward roll. These are all things you can pick up with a gymnastics mat and a little bit of time. It's not a super hard skill to acquire, but it's a very valuable one.
For sure. We can all take notes from our little kids tumbling around all the time. So The next question. So now we sufficiently scared everybody about bike racing. But Amber, yeah. How do you mentally and emotionally, this is a good question. How do you mentally and emotionally balance the risk to benefit ratio of racing, especially a race style as potentially dangerous as a criterium is the question. How do you answer that? Being that you were a professional, but also now not a professional. So
yeah, I made that choice for a long time. It's a personal decision, number one, I'll say, but I do think that it's important to understand that there is so much of this that is actually within your control. And we've all been there. There are those races, or sorry, there are those crashes that are unavoidable, you can't control what other people do, but there's so much that you can control about how you respond to what people around you are doing. And it's the same thing as driving a car. You get out there on the roads, there's just a white painted line on the road that's keeping people from driving in your lane, right? Like that's not a physical barrier. You're trusting other people to do the things that are going to be predictable and keep everybody safe. And you can do the same thing to an extent in bike races. And just like driving on the road, you build up a skill set so that you feel confident in your ability to manage when things go off the rails or somebody does something unpredictable or makes a mistake. And I think going back to what I said before, the confidence is a really big part of this. So when you really work on specific skills, not only do you actually get better at your handling and you're safer, but you feel more confident, which means you are going to be less fearful, which means that you can devote more mental energy and focus to the things that matter, to the types of awareness that will help you be proactive in a race. Skills that you can work on outside of racing that are really important. Work on cornering, work on really feeling how your body moves on the bike and how moving your center of gravity on the bike affects the sensations of being on the bike. Ride with other people so that you get a sense of being on the wheel and understanding how you can look ahead of the rider in front of you to predict the obstacles that they may need to navigate instead of staring at the wheel that's right in front of you. How can you start looking further ahead? How can you start extending your awareness so you can be more predictive in your actions, more proactive, and then reducing the amount of, reducing the times that you need to be reactive? Those are the types of skills that you want to do. So cornering, we talk about bumping drills. The reason you want to do bumping drills is not because you want to learn how to bump people in a race. What it does is you want to learn how to train your intuition. So if somebody does contact you in a race by accident, you are going to have the appropriate response without having to think about it. That's another piece that's going to give you confidence in being in the group. So you're no longer worried about somebody touching you because you know if they do, you know exactly what to do. You know you'll do it instinctively. That's one less thing you have to worry about so that you can focus on how are two or three riders ahead of me moving? How is that going to affect the rider in front of me? And how can I predict where I need to be safe? Those are the types of things that you want to be working on. So really getting out there, doing group rides, ride with people whose wheels you trust, practice drafting, practice passing, practice taking your bottle out and putting it back in the bottle cage again. Practice doing that in a group around people where you feel safe and you have space to get better and better at that. Just little things like that. What are the things in the race that maybe cause you fear? See if you can recreate those scenarios on group rides where you have a little bit more space, a little bit more mental capacity to focus, to learn, and to hone those skills so that they become more automatic. Because the more of those skills that become automatic in the race, the more you can focus on the things that really matter. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on that one, but hopefully that's helpful.
But one point to add to the bumping drills is the desensitization. So
yes,
you have what you mentioned, Amber, but also desensitizing yourself to that impact is a big deal, because even if you can achieve that relaxed, confident state or that confident, relaxed state, you can get jarred from it really abruptly if someone makes contact with you that you're not familiar with. So you do those bumping drills and you learn that those little pieces of contact don't necessarily mean you're going to crash, don't even necessarily mean you need to stop pedaling. It's hugely beneficial. So yes. I think more than anything, skip the balance drills and jump to the bumping drills. I honestly, that's probably a bad way to put it, because you have to have the balance in order to do the bumping, but they're very, very, very important.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's wrapping back to what Amber said. It is a personal choice whether you want to do that, and find ways to be able to, if you do end up wanting to race criteriums that you feel uncomfortable with, you can find ways to ease yourself in. So everybody out there that's racing, race safe, race smart. make the tactical moves that matter most and the ones that are safe. Chances are there's a different way to success than the most obvious one that everyone else is working toward. And it might even be a safer one that you can work toward in a race. So Nate, I'm excited for your race this weekend. I'm excited for it.
Call it a workout.
It's
You're
big.
just excited to see me suck.
I'm just curious to see, like, I mean, we're going to learn a lot after this one. So,
we're not going to learn much. Like, what are we going to learn? That I'm slow?
We're going to find out how slow
relative
you are.
to me. I'm not going to be slow for everybody, but exactly how slow. We know I'm going to do I was looking at it while Chad did this deep dive. I'm going to do a 6.8 VO2 max workout at 320.
Explains so much.
So that's not, well, I've got a lot of razz for interrupting you on some of these things. So I just want to
find other things to do.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Keep my brain going.
That's great.
Something about like muscle type, but I'm going to get a biopsy. I think that's what you pretty much said.
That was the takeaway. You got it.
Great takeaways. Thanks for wrapping it up for us, Nate. If you're joining us on YouTube right now, give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this episode, share it with other people, and share the podcast with other people as well. And head over to TrainerRoad.com, sign up for the adaptive training beta. We're still adding people in regularly. And man, in the live chat, it's been cool to see all these people talking about how great their training has been since they've started using adaptive training. Super exciting. So we'll talk to you all next week. And on that note, we'll see you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.